Hello there, Nareg is here. Today I'm gonna talk about operations with inequalities. So we're interested in addition, subtraction, multiplication, even squaring of inequalities, and what are these operations that we can perform. Let's first start with addition, subtraction, and let's consider that we have A, B, and C, three real numbers. It could be any real number. Whenever we have, let's say, A smaller or equal to B, and I want to add a certain number C, so I will have A plus C will still remain smaller than, so A plus C will still remain smaller than B plus C. This inequality will not change its sign. It will remain the same. So let's take an example. Let's say we have a square root of 2 smaller than 2, just like A smaller than B. And I want to add the value 3. So it will be square root of 2 plus 3. It will still remain smaller than 2 plus 3. As you know, square root of 2 is 1 point, plus 3 it will be 4 point, and 2 plus 3 is 5, so it will still remain, square root of 2 plus 3 will remain smaller than 2 plus 3. In a similar way, we can do the subtraction. We have A smaller than B. I can say A minus C will still remain smaller than B minus C. Let's take the same example. We have square root of 2 smaller than B. Square root of 2 minus 3 will still remain smaller than 2 minus 3. In fact, square root of 2 is 1 point, minus 3 it will be, so minus 1 point something. 2 minus 3 is minus 1. So minus 1 is greater than minus 1 point a certain decimal. This is for addition and subtraction. So I'm going to add here that this is the part related to addition and subtraction. Now, what about multiplication or division? Let's go to the next step and talk about multiplication or division. Again, we have A, B, and C, which are real numbers. And one more time, A is smaller than B. Now, in case I want to multiply by a certain value which is C, and if C was positive, I can say that A times C will remain smaller than B times C. Example. Let's say we have 2 smaller than, so 2 smaller than 3, and I'm gonna multiply by C, which is 5, let's say, which is 5, it's positive value. So 2 times 5 will still remain smaller than 3 times 5. In fact, 10 is smaller than 15. Now, in case C was negative, if C was negative, we can say A times C will be greater than B times C. In this case, it will change. So I will have, in the same example, let's say 2 smaller than 3, and I'm going to multiply by C, which is minus 5. I will have minus 10 greater than minus 15. Alright, now what about the division? Again, we still have A smaller or equal to B. If I'm gonna divide by C and C was positive, if C was positive, I can say that A over C will be smaller than B over C. And now let's take the same example, 2 smaller than 3, and I'm going to divide by C, which is equal to 5, and it's positive. 2 over 5 is 0.4, is smaller than 3 over 5, which is 0.6. So the sign of this inequality will remain the same. Now what happens if C was negative? If C was negative, in this case A over C will be greater than B over C. And let's take C negative, minus 5. You will have 2 over minus 5, it is minus 0.4, will be greater than 3 over minus 5, which is minus 0.6. So these are the properties related to the multiplication and division. So this is multiplication or division. You have to check whether you're multiplying or dividing by a negative sign. You need to change the inequality. Alright, if it's greater, it will become smaller. If it's smaller, it will become greater. That's what you should pay attention to. Now, what about squaring? So, square and square root. Let's say we have, this is squaring, let's say we have A smaller than B. Alright, the first case is if A is smaller than B, but both of them are positive. In this case, you can deduce that A squared will be smaller than B squared. Let's take an example. If we have 2 smaller than 3, it means that 2 squared will still remain smaller than 3 squared, and the fact is 4 is smaller than 9. Alright? Now what about the second case? If A is smaller than B and both of them are negative, in this case you should pay attention that A squared will be greater than B squared. Let's take an example. If I have A, which is minus 3, smaller than minus 2, and I'm gonna square them, I will have minus 3 to the power of 2 will be greater than minus 2 to the power of 2, and the fact is 9 is greater than 4. Alright, now the last part is if we have again A smaller than B, but both of them are positive. In this case, you can use that the square root of A will be smaller than square root of B. So I'm going to take an example. Let's say we have A, which is 4. So 4 is smaller than 9. Excuse me. 4 is smaller than 9, which means the square root of 4 will remain smaller than the square root of 9, and the fact is 2 is smaller than 3. So these are the properties related to squaring or square root that you can use. So I'm gonna simply add that this is related to square or square root. Now I didn't take the case where a and b are negative and I'm checking the square root because the square root of a negative value does not exist. The last part related to these operations is related to the reciprocal. So in case I had a and b positive, a and b positive real numbers, and the first one, if a is smaller than b, and of course both of them are positive, I can say that 1 over a will be greater than 1 over b. You have to change the inequality. So let's take an example related to this case. We have 2 smaller than 3 and both of them are positive. From this you can deduce that 1 over 2 will be greater than 1 over 3, and 1 over 2 is actually 0.5, which is greater than 0.333. Now what happens if a and b are both of them a smaller than b and both of them are negative? In this case 1 over a will be greater than 1 over b. Again, you have to change the sign. So we can say that minus 3 is smaller than minus 2. In this case, minus 1 over 3 will be greater than minus 1 over 2. Minus 0.33 is greater than minus 0.5. And the last part, if a is negative while b is positive, what happens in this case? Of course 1 over a will remain smaller than 1 over b. It's simple. You will have, let's say, minus 3 is smaller than 2, which means that minus 1 over 3 will still remain smaller than 1 over 2. So this was the case of reciprocal. Now I'm gonna take a couple of other operations related to these inequalities, and we're gonna be able to finish this video. Let's say we had A, B, C, and D real numbers. So they are real numbers. The first thing that you can say, if A smaller than B and C smaller than D, from this you can deduce that A plus C will be smaller than B plus D. How can we prove that? Very simple. We have A smaller than B. I can use the properties related to addition and subtraction, so why not add C? I can add C. I will have A plus C still smaller than B plus C. So this is the first part. The second part, I have C smaller than D. I'm gonna add B, so I will obtain C plus B is smaller than D plus B. And as you can see, A plus C is smaller than B plus C, while B plus C is smaller than D plus B. So from these two I can deduce this relation. The last case is when you have a plus a, b, c and d positive real numbers. Positive real numbers, because we're gonna use some the multiplication and division. So let's say the case was similar to this previous one: a smaller than b, c smaller than d, and you can deduce that a times c will be smaller than b plus d. How are we supposed to prove this? Again, it's quite simple. You have a smaller than b. Whenever you're multiplying by c, which is positive, the inequality will remain a times c smaller than b times c. The second case is when you have c smaller than d, you will multiply by b, which is positive, so c times b will be smaller than d times b. And from these two lines you can deduce that a times c is smaller than b times c, which is smaller than d times b. So from these two you will have this property, which you can use it as a general result, general property. That's all for this video related to operations with inequalities. Why don't you subscribe to my channel and you will be notified whenever I upload new videos. I can also share with you my Instagram and Facebook account. You can contact me directly, or you can leave a comment below. That's all for today, and see you next time.